All right, welcome everybody to our session tonight. Special Education Dilemmas for Children and Families Experiencing Divorce. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Ruff, who's going to share a little bit more about the Southern Tier Special Ed Task Force that makes this happen. Thanks, Sue.
Sure. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is a really hard topic because it's emotional for a lot of families and for a lot of kids. And so thank you for joining us tonight. The task force, the Special Ed Task Force, basically started over in the Capital District quite a few years ago when lawyers who represented parents in school districts and educators got together and said, what could we do to make things easier for families, for parents, for school districts, and especially things can sometimes become adversarial at an IEP meeting. And they thought, well, maybe one way is if we do some educational things together and everybody understands education law and kids' rights. And so so they started doing that. They started putting together programs for families and for educators. And it's easier if you know the people on the other side of the table sometimes, and you have to negotiate things that might be rather difficult or things that might be really exciting for your child. And so from the Albany area, it grew to other parts of the state. We were one of the first in the state, our area down in the Southern Tier, to try to also have programs, have 4 or 5 programs over the course of a year for families and for teachers and for other professionals. So we welcome you tonight this is really the first topic that we started this year. And I want to introduce our 3 panelists. And I didn't copy over this, but I have it on my phone. So if I take my glasses off and go like that, please forgive me. I want to introduce our panelists. Beth Kurkowski, and Beth is waving. Hello. Beth has been practicing divorce mediation since 2001, and she is certified in several areas of mediation, including special education, family court, including custody, visitation, child support. She is also certified in Department of Labor and divorce mediation. She has implemented peer mediation in 11 area schools. And Beth provides conflict resolution and mediation to law enforcement officers, school personnel, students, public assistance recipients, and people who are residing in jails. Tanya Pelletier is also with us tonight. Tanya is a licensed psychologist who is also very experienced working in county mental health, residential treatment, schools, universities, hospitals, and also in private practice. She currently works for the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. She has spent a lot of her time working with children that struggle with anxiety, but she's worked with families that have also struggled with a variety of challenges, including divorce and separation. She is also a certified mediator and a parenting expert. And our third panelist is Francis Rizzo. Francis is a social worker who is employed at Helping Celebrate Abilities based in Johnson City. He is a professional who has been responsible for providing Article 16 mental health counseling in-home family support services, and also assisting CPSE faculty to support students and families who are trying to navigate local resources. And I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and hope that some more of the people, we had finally about 30 people who signed up. So let's hope some more of them join us. But meanwhile, we don't want to hold up the people who are with us tonight and are waiting to hear our three panelists. So I turn it over to you, and you guys figure out who's starting and how.
You know, we didn't even actually practice that whole rollout, guys. But you know, I guess I feel like I would like to jump in because I know, you know, we use the term, you know, dilemma in the title of our talk, and I know, Susan, obviously it can be a very sensitive and emotional topic. But I think I'd like to start off by saying that there's a lot of good news, you know, when it comes to these changing in families and these big transitions that families make, and some of our unique family situations that result from some of these family conflicts. You know, kids are pretty resilient. And, you know, if we can, you know, if we can, you know, answer questions tonight and buckle down on kind of what is good parenting, good caregiving, you know, kids don't have to be destroyed by this whole process. I always say that it's not divorce that hurts children, it's conflict. So if we as caregivers can work together to kind of help minimize the conflict, then divorce and transition and change doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a growth opportunity. You know, there's nothing wrong with challenge. We certainly want to protect our kids from, you know, the most detrimental challenge. But, you know, if we work together to support families and kids through this process, it can actually be quite a healthy, growing opportunity for everybody. Like I said, kids are resilient, you know, and if we can minimize that conflict through our work as you know, support people in their lives, you know, this can be, you know, something that can help them grow to, you know, withstand and tolerate, you know, the adversarial issues and things that are going to come up in their lives later in life. So I just always try and like help families just set the stage of you know, this you know, this can be an opportunity to make everybody better and grow as a family and as a community, you know, that involves obviously, you know, students, teachers rather, educational faculty, you know, and other caregivers that are in these children's lives. So I thought I'd just kind of start us off with a little good news and uplifting, you know, message on that. So.
Yeah, definitely good to start off on a good foot. So thank you for volunteering to go first with that, Tanya. It's a good preface. And so I think something that the three of us had agreed upon, you know, before this actual meeting took place, was that it'd be important to let folks know who might be watching live, but also watching the recording, is that yes, the title and the center focus of this event will be around families experiencing divorce, but also a lot of the stuff that we might talk about tonight could apply to other family structures as well. Maybe ones that don't specifically include divorce, but potentially could include single caregivers. You know, so as a provider myself, plenty of the caregivers of the folks that I help, that I support, may not necessarily be their biological parents at all. We've got grandparents, we've got older siblings, we've got foster parents who, of course, you know, often aren't the biological parents. So plenty of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, hopefully will apply to other situations as well. And hopefully folks will find it just as relevant, even if divorce isn't necessarily something in the immediate present that's causing any distress. But nonetheless, families are different, but we also have a lot of similarities too. And many of us experience anxiety in anticipation of big changes, which is normal. That's human. And divorce can be one of those big changes.
I definitely agree with that. And even though I am a divorce mediator, I think the bottom line, as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be individuals that are married parents. And I think just striving for the communication aspect of the relationship and the decision making. So even in special education mediation, where it might be the school district versus the parents or the grandparents of a child receiving services, I think it's just crucial that, you know, the conflict, being able to maybe work through the conflict, but get through to the communication aspect of it, and for the best interest of the children or the child. I think that we had talked about starting with taking questions. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, we all agreed that, we want to make sure that all the participants kind of walk away with, some relevant information to their situation. Obviously we know that some of those things can be sensitive, but we thought maybe based on some initial questions that would launch into, other, areas where we can focus, because the three of us agreed we could probably talk for 3 days together. So we want to focus on what's important for those that are here with us tonight.
Yeah, and so please feel free in the chat. You can drop it in the chat. You can open your mic, I believe, and share as much or as little as you like to. But we're here to be a support to you, as well as to be a support for any listeners who may not be live. So, if there's any immediate thoughts, feel free to swing it over to us. We'll give you a minute to do that real quick.
I have a question. My name is Jennifer and I work as a school counselor. And so I'm also often involved in CSE meetings or the process of referral for evaluations. And one of the things that sometimes comes up for kids who are from divorced families or parents who just aren't together is what happens if one parent is willing to sign consent and another parent isn't? How does that work? Because we seem to get unsure answers on what's okay to do with one parent consent versus is there something else that requires consent from both parties?
Mm-hmm.
It's a sticky situation. I think it depends on the context for sure, right?
Yeah, and I don't have a specific situation. I just know that was one of the things I came in with tonight is, if you have any input on, more general guidelines or a place to go for specific parts of the special education process that do require both or only require one parent consent.
I come from the mental health fields, and so I know sometimes the mental health requirements versus like the school related educational law can be a little bit different. Maybe Beth can kind of help us, kind of navigate the legal end of that question. Because I know that as a private practitioner, I wasn't required to have permission from both parents, but I did as a policy in my own practice and, require that both parents kind of buy into the therapeutic process, because I quite often saw when I wasn't doing that there was some sabotage from one parent, to the process. So I liked having buy-in from both sides. And I liked, partnering and incorporating information from both sides. But there might be a legal answer to that question, Beth, right?
Yeah, and I think, Sue, you probably have the policy right in front of you. When I was a parent mentor advocate, going into the schools, I mean, there were parents that would flat out just not want their child to be tested. And I believe, and I don't know from the legal aspect end of it, that the school can eventually, they have to go through certain steps to be able to evaluate a child, if the parents really absolutely refuse to have the child. And now you're talking two parents. So is there a primary parent, is another parent maybe just absent? So I don't know. Sue, do you have the regs right there on that? The Part 200 regs, would it be under?
No, I don't, because I'm at home.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. But Jennifer, send us through to Nancy, if you would, that question, and we'll look it up.
Okay.
And
all right. Thank you.
I don't want to sidetrack it, because I think what Tanya said was really, and what Francis and what they're all saying is really important about buy-in.
Yes, and that would be our, that would be our ideal approach, but we just have had situations where, one parent signs consent and then the other parent says, no, I don't want that to happen. Well, what are we okay to do at that point or not okay to do at that point? Whether it's an evaluation or a reeval or change in program, and I get there's no quick answer because there's so many variables, but I was just looking for some general guidance. But our preference would always be to have everybody come to the same page so that we are working together, but sometimes that's hard to get to.
It is, and sometimes it just takes that real kind of finesse consultative approach, to each, parent or each, caregiver in this situation, because, there could very well be, appropriate grounds for saying, I don't think it's appropriate to evaluate my child, but and just to kind of play devil's advocate, I think that there are also parents out there that, might come at this question from I need to control this situation kind of perspective. So that gives you, in your background, Jennifer, a real nice opportunity to kind of just to kind of connect with both sides, to say, because sometimes a parent will say, I'm not going to say yes to this because I want to have some control. I've lost so much control in this process for one reason or another. And here is something I can do legally. I can say no, and I can stop this whole situation. Forgetting maybe in the moment or losing sight long-term that what they're doing is harming their child's ability to access support, right? So, here's a nice opportunity for you or the school psychologist, whoever kind of fits that role in your district, to be able to sit down and connect with this parent who is maybe feeling like they don't want to give consent, to somehow give them a sense of control in this process, and making sure that they understand that they have important information to share, that they have an important perspective. Maybe it's not the custodial parent, but they still have, like I said, an important perspective to share about their child, and to somehow give them a little bit of that sense of control so they can feel like they can let go of that no and allow the school to move forward. I think sometimes you get stuck in that dynamic, that divorce dynamic, just to kind of, simplify things a little bit, but you can kind of connect with that parent to help them understand how much they can give back to the situation, help their child in the long run. Just get them out of the divorce and get them into being a parent.
For sure. And I think, and that's the thing too, not to sound like a broken record or anything, but I do really think that context is important here, because there are plenty of reasons why, said parent may revoke consent. For example, like I can think of a particular case where a parent had revoked consent because they were afraid of their child, at the conclusion of the evaluation, being discriminated against for having some kind of a disability, right? And so it could genuinely be coming from a different place than, say, another parent who, as was described before, is trying to assert some sort of power over the situation. So that's, I think, where, not that you don't already do this, I'm sure you do, but trying to figure out what the context is that would potentially motivate the parent to say no in this context. Because if it is out of genuine concern, then you have common ground. Children have a legal right in the United States to have an education that accommodates what their psychological and cognitive and developmental circumstances are. And so that's the goal that we're all trying to get as providers, as parents. Well, that's the page that we're all on. We just have to figure out where that middle ground is here. And it may be that, as a provider, my context, my motivation here is that I need, I'm trying to do an evaluation because I want to help support your child, and the parent, for what their reason, for what they might believe to be the best interest of their child, is to keep them away from complications. And so again, not that you don't already do that, but I think it's really important for me to say, and for the audience, that you might have very well concerns about the potential for your child to come into some friction in social contexts if they're identified as having a disability. And that's human, and that's normal. That's okay. That's proof that you care about your child's well-being and that you want them to have a good time in this world. We're all on the same page. We have to talk with each other and try to figure out where we can meet.
I'm so glad you said that, Francis, because I mean, to add to that context issue, because there are so many different reasons why a parent would say no. You're right. I was kind of like, like kind of thinking more along the lines of the divorce, but I
Sure.
had a parent say, I don't want my child to be evaluated because I don't want them to get services, because as an adult, they're not going to get services. So why should they get used to getting services now? There's so many different, reasons why a family might say no, or a parent might say no. And my argument to that was always, well, there is no context in life that is like school. Your kid will leave school and will never see anything like that again. So to get them to that, we got to get them through the school thing. And so, they'll be able to self-select and choose their path in life. They don't have a choice right now. So we need to find a way through supports or what have you to get them through this piece of their life, which will be so different than anything they're used to. But if they have a rough experience through this elementary, middle, and high school, is that going to impact their access to where they want to be down the road? And do we just need to give them that tool, that IEP or whatever the case may be, to get through this, which is like unlike anything else?
For sure. I hope that helped, Jennifer.
That was helpful. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate it.
You're very
I-
welcome. Thank you.
I remember talking with Beth and a few months ago about what happens when you bring two people who are having a really hard time communicating with each other together to talk about what's best for this child that we share.
Mm-hmm.
And that we both have responsibility for, and we both recognize has some needs, and we may have different ideas about how those needs can be met. But here we are in this place right now, and sometimes the other issues that are going on in the family can seem to overwhelm the focus of what this particular child needs. So I didn't say it as well as you did, Beth, but
Well, I think first and foremost, we're making the assumption that parents are communicating with each other. And I think a lot of times outside of maybe a specific room, they're not communicating. And now the divorce is taking priority over maybe what the kids might need at the time, as far as school or, other areas might just, the divorce part of the process in their life might overwhelm them. So as far as, I know that when working in other areas other than divorce, as a divorce mediator, parents were not communicating with each other, and one didn't know that consent form was sent and waiting on that to be signed and sent back. And they say they don't communicate outside unless it's something major. So I think first and foremost, just that whole communication, if parties can put their differences aside for the best interest of the kids, and say, okay, we need to, focus mainly on, what services, or, what are the kids' needs as far as whether it be medical, educational, they need, and try to put their differences aside to still be the primary decision makers for the kids. But easier said than done, I think.
For sure. It can be, in a lot of unfortunate cases, it can be where if there's a particularly high level of conflict between the two parents, it can be where the child feels like they need to pick a side. And that's really unfortunate a lot of the time, because that also interferes with whether or not they communicate with either parent about what happened in school, or their frustrations with, or their satisfactions with school, because this is a thing that I do with my other parent. This is a thing that I talk to so-and-so about. And if there's already a high level of conflict or touching on some personal stuff for a lot of folks to begin with on a daily basis with the other parent in the process of the separation. It's easy for kids to get wrapped up in that as well and become, sort of end up in a place where they're in the middle, and they feel like, whether this is actually the case or not, the child feels like they have to shape what they communicate and how they communicate because so and so is stressed out, because so and so is angry at so and so, and I don't want to tell this parent this thing because so and so is going to be mad that I shared this really important thing to me with the other parent. It's much easier said than done, and I certainly would not say that it's simple, but that's what's most important here is to try as best as they can for the parents to have the education, the well-being of the child over here, and then the marital and separation conversations and dynamics over here, so that the child doesn't have to make decisions that they think isn't, that would require putting their own concerns aside in the best interest of their parents, because that's the parents. The parents are trying to be there for the children, and all the stuff that they're going through, all the stress that they're feeling, it can get difficult for children to know how to navigate that with a new transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I had clients in yesterday, and the one parent said the opposite parent gets them off the bus, never opens the school folder ever.
Right.
Feeds the kids dinner, they go back to the other parent. So that could primarily fall on one parent. And one parent is, as you were saying, is the parent that the kids go to just decompress and say, this is what happened at school today, and does not feel comfortable telling the other parent. And one parent just might not be in tune with the whole school process part of it. They're struggling just to be the other parent.
I think it's so interesting because when parents are married, they naturally delineate roles, right? So that's what a partnership does, right? We don't double down on tasks. We share and we differentiate and delineate. But once there's a separation, that becomes such an issue. Well, he only does that or she only does that. And I'm like, well, wasn't it always like that? So it is interesting how once there's this conflicted ridge, or rift, that becomes something so out of the norm and something to kind of complain about. But when we're a nuclear family, and have both roles in one home, it's smart. It's divide and conquer. It's being more efficient. So I always try and help families navigate through that transition, because when you are in two separate households, it's harder to divide and conquer because you're not communicating as well, right? But I always try and help each parent celebrate the fact that this is an opportunity for everybody to pick up skills they never had, or in a better functioning situation where there is communication, continue the delineation. I just think it's so interesting. I just wanted to kind of tag off of what you were saying, because what's normal in an intact family seems so negative in a family that's transitioned to living in two homes. But these are all things we have to kind of help through. And as folks at school, Jennifer, I'm just picking on you because I know you're school personnel, just to maybe get some insight into those family dynamics so that you can kind of be prepared, because quite often, I'm sure, kids come to you, in the school environment, and they're just reporting and regurgitating all the stuff that they're seeing, and being able to respond in a way that, can kind of help them through this, normalize this, and to Frances's point, get them off the hook for being the reporters and the caregivers of their parents, which they often do place themselves in that role.
For sure. Yeah, and I think I say this all the time. I'm a social worker, so I've said this a million times in a million different contexts. That's why it's so important to try to widen your circle of support as much as possible, to have as much access to people who can support the child and support the child's education as possible, because life is stressful, particularly when there's a transition from being in a partnership into separation. That's a big change to begin with, and then there's a shift in roles, and that brings a lot of anxiety for everybody involved a lot of the time, because it's a change, and change is tough. And so if you have, for us as providers and for parents, if you have other folks that you communicate with about the child's education, that you can keep in communication with about what you're seeing, that will help solidify little bits and pieces of life that you now don't need to worry about. That's one less thing off your plate, that there's somebody else involved here that can help support you on this, whether it be a behavior that you're seeing at home that's not at school, or something concerning, the IEP at school, or it's an after school program thing, or it's anything. That's another person in your child's life that could potentially support your child, and by extension you. So that's good. Circle supports should get bigger, but I'm a social worker. I say that all the time. But it's fine.
And I want to pick on Jennifer, but not just Jennifer. Communication for the people who work at the school. When you have several individuals, it might be more than two individuals. There might be a step parent involved who comes with their own sense of responsibility and purpose, or grandparents who are also doing some responsible things. Communicating with all of them. Is it the teacher's job to send home emails at the end of the day to several people? And in terms of just trying to make sure that everybody is on the page about what happened today. How does that get resolved? And or is that something that does that ever come up in the work that y'all are doing with families in terms of and again, this is a communication issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely comes up. We just had parent teacher conference time. So I also work in a middle school, so it's a little bit of a transition time for students and families, because they're coming out of elementary school where they primarily have one teacher and that's who they meet with, versus coming into a middle school where they have different teachers and travel throughout the day. So there's even more communicating. It's not just one teacher letting people at home know how things are going. So we're a smaller district. We try really hard to know our families and know when we're reaching out to set up something like a parent teacher conference. Is it a student where you can have a parent teacher conference and have any caregivers sit at the same table? Or sometimes there are situations where parents will say to us, I want a conference, but I will not sit at the same table as the other parent. So sometimes we have to duplicate the meetings and get information to both parties, which, it's difficult for teachers who only have so many time slots. Yet if you have a parent who wants to participate in the meeting, you want to make sure they're getting the information. So we try to navigate as carefully as possible to accommodate and in the end do what seems best for the student.
And I think in my documents, I do put that the parents kind of have a responsibility and agree to share notices of school functions, parent-teacher conferences, and again, to just try to get that collaborative process going where, I also have people that won't come and sit at the same table. I mean, I think that's the hardest part for most of my clients. But as we're working through the document, then they're getting separated or divorced, that still for the best interest of the kids, you guys agreed to communicate in regards to all of everything that's going on in their life. In addition to the other things about not speaking poorly about the other parent in front of the children. So there's like other areas. So you know, just to try to lay that foundation moving forward, that living in the same household, now you're going to be living separate and apart, but the kids still have to, you know, parents still need to be able to parent the kids and make sure that they're benefiting from both of the parents.
Yeah, and again, I think it's about, making sure both parents are aware that, ultimately both parents having all of the information is in the best interest of the child. Because again, there's sometimes that controlling of information, but if I'm a parent who wants to keep my child, to myself, and I'm trying to keep information away from my ex, I, as somebody who works with this family, try and help that parent understand that that's only going to come back to bite you. Allowing information to get to your child's other parent will help that parent be, overall a better support to your kid. It'll help your kid flourish, which in turn will help your relationship with this child too. I try and help them project, that here and now need for control and desire for control and what that's going to look like, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and just help them step back a second and just get out of the way of the conflict and help them focus on what's best for the children, which ultimately will be best for everybody. It's helping them be a little less short-sighted in that just, anger and that, that intense negative feeling that comes from, some of these, conflicted family situations.
And a lot of times that's even before there's new significant others. So trying to lay that foundation.
That's part 2 to this
Sorry,
presentation.
Tanya.
That's a whole nother thing. Woo!
We won't go there tonight, but
Well,
how
maybe
does
we
all
will,
of
but
that
yeah, that's
hold
just
up
an added
to
factor.
the next stage in the kids' lives?
Yeah.
So just trying to, again, as you were saying, lay that foundation that's for the right thing in the interest of the kids.
Do we want to see if anybody else has any questions?
Yeah, please. Feel free to open it, open your mic, put it in the chat bubble, whatever you like, folks. We're here for you.
In the work that you do with families, do the kids themselves bring things to you that that again, you had mentioned earlier, Francis, about a little bit about that and about the load that kids carry on their own shoulders of not wanting to hurt anybody or trying to find a way through a situation that's really uncomfortable. So when you work with kids, what are some things that you might be able to say to them that would help the situation? Because I think kids can sometimes internalize the stress of the situation. It's stressful enough if you're going between different homes anyway,
Sure.
and different parenting styles, which cause a lot of conflict. I talked to a mom recently who said her child's father has such a different style in terms of the way that he works with their child, that it takes her about 2 or 3 days after he gets back home before he's kind of settled down into what he needs, where she feels he needs to be, because he stays up very late when he's at his father's. He doesn't always eat really well when he's at his father's, and all these dynamics that you know, the kid's trying to learn how to survive in both places probably. And yet just the whole area of raising kids and having different priorities, but the pressure that must put on the kids themselves.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked because I mean, you know, you talked about, kids just figuring out how to try to survive. That's what we're all doing. Some of us just have a lot many years more of practice on knowing what to do and how to problem solve and how to process stress. And yeah, so I mean all of the folks that I see have some kind of intellectual or developmental disability. They all have eligibility through the state through OPWDD. So there's an introduction into already trying to acclimate a child, a growing person into a new situation. But then you have a new variable there, which is the fact that they may very well have some kind of learning disability. They may have some kind of cognitive disability, which also has a hand in how they're going to process these new changes as well, especially if it's somebody who has a particularly difficult time navigating a change in their typical structured day, right? And so I've had a theme, I feel comfortable saying, of plenty of kiddos who I think conceptually understand that when I say it's not your fault, well, okay, yeah, no, I get that. But I think emotionally, I think it's a different situation some of the time. It's so important that children understand that whatever is happening between the two parents, that is not your fault. That this is not something that you did. You didn't do anything wrong. And, there might be changes involved in all of this that will be adverse to you and that will be maybe not as pleasant as the typical structure routine that you had. And that's really tragic. But we're going to try to work together to mitigate as many of these negative changes as we can so we can support you. But I need you to know that it's not your fault because I have so many kids that have come and tried to do everything they possibly can to be the fixer because they love their parents. And that's not your job. You love your parents and that's wonderful and they love you. But what happens between them is not your fault and it's not your responsibility. And so many kids get stressed about that and then have other more complicated things that are going on that require, further therapy or stronger circles of support because of that underlying stress that is there in the background for them. That, oh gosh, I did something wrong. What can I do to fix this? And it's, so when you ask, do kids bring stuff to me? Yeah, people bring all sorts of stuff, but I see that one all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the time. That it's their responsibility to fix a change in their life.
So from my practice perspective, I would take that to the parents. So sometimes I was able to have parents working together collaboratively. Most often I was working with each parent separately. And I would, I was sharing with my co-presenters yesterday that I have certain mantras. And one of my big mantras that I would share with parents if a child came to me with that type of concern is the greatest gift you could give your child is permission to love the other parent. And I think that really, goes a long way in letting kids just take that deep breath of not feeling like they have to report to each parent or, manage each parent or emotionally support each parent, which is developmentally so inappropriate, for a child in general, but especially, considering the audience of children that we're, keeping in the back of our minds today. And that, helping parents understand that who that other parent was as a spouse is very different, can be very different than who they are as a parent. Can they be bad at both? Sure. But 99% of the time, what happened in the marital relationship really has nothing to do with the parent-child relationship. And to allow those parents to just let go of that animosity from spouse to spouse and allow the parent-child relationship to flourish giving that child permission to love that other parent is by far the greatest gift you can give your child. And I think that speaks directly to kind of what Francis was saying about what message he would send to children, because ultimately, if that message doesn't come from the parents, it will be lost. I mean, as therapists, I think it's important for us to reassure children it's not your fault. And I think that that does go a long way. But the best benefit is if in their day-to-day actions, in allowing the children to talk about what happens at mommy's house, at daddy's house, you know, and vice versa, or whatever the parenting situation might be. I think that sends the strongest message of it's okay. You don't have to worry about us anymore.
It's so true. It's so true because it's not just saying, "Oh, I want to know," but actually showing them, directly asking, "How did it go? Did you have a good time? What did you eat for dinner?" Shows them that you not only do you have an interest in what happened, but also that you're open to talking about things involving the other parent without them needing to necessarily feel like they need to walk on eggshells. And that also like carries over to education as well. If they're struggling with a particular, thing at parent A's house, and maybe you're not necessarily communicating with parent A as much, well, the child will also keep both of you involved in some of their struggles at school, and talking about some of the way that roles tend to play out with one parent maybe not being as great of the homework person as the other. It happens. That's fine. I can't do math. That's okay. But you know what?
I'm a school psychologist and I was horrible at helping with homework.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it's just,
That's
it is
normal.
what it is.
It's all about reminding the child that they're part of a team. That's all it
Yes.
is. Make the team, when possible, let's make the team bigger, but we all have the same goal
Right.
here.
But not everybody on a baseball team is a first baseman, right?
That's
So
right.
we each have our own specific role.
That's right.
We have another question that's come in the chat asking, how do we as parents plan for transition for our kids during our separation or after divorce?
Okay.
Just
I didn't-
clarifies that transition between homes.
I believe so. I don't know if our questioner wants to unmute themselves. You can, or you can type in the chat if you want to give more information. Okay.
That was
Yeah.
my assumption. I just didn't want to assume that that's.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think I'm happy to help, but I think this is more the purview of the two of you. You have the most experience with this, I would think.
I think parents have a hard time figuring out transition just to get started. And, I hear all the time that, kids don't bring, the other parent doesn't bring the kid's clothes back, no less that the kid forgot his or her soccer cleats. Like there's a lot of just really basic stuff that is overwhelming for parents trying to get through that process. And, I always try to let them know that kids will eventually get used to the schedule. If they know Tuesday, Thursday's Dad's Day, then they'll get into the routine of that. But, then it starts, the franticness of getting a call from a kid that's at practice and doesn't have what he or she needs. And now it just puts both parents in a bit of a frenzy. And so I think it's a process personally. I mean, I just see it with my clients as far as trying to get into the routine of having that discussion as far as, I bought all those new clothes and you're not sending them back. Like I'm not spending all the money, so you buy the kids their own clothes to keep at your house, or don't send them back dirty or whatever the discussion is. I think transition in that sense is difficult and takes a little bit of time for the parents to get into. But I'm not sure if that is the transition piece of it or not.
Well, I think those are important things. And I've seen parents be pretty creative, and technology certainly helps with that, in that they might kind of have like a joint account that they, kind of feed into and pull from so that kids have what they need at both homes. Because I think I've seen a lot of issues when parents insist that my stuff stays here and my stuff stays here. And that's kind of very inorganic way of looking at things. So I try and help families be more creative in how they can make sure that if, my child is leaving my house on Monday, they have everything they need to get to school. And that there is minimal things that have to go back and forth. Because if you ask your children to pack a suitcase every time they transition, that's a lot. So I think it's important for caregivers to reach out to third party neutral people like us to help them be creative in those types of things about like how the stuff navigates. Kind of above and beyond that and arching above that, I think is that I try and help parents find a balance between not shying away from transition, because I think it's okay for kids to practice that, but also to understand that kids naturally are terrible at it. And I'm also kind of thinking, more specifically to our kids that have IEPs and 504s that might have an ADHD diagnosis, who organically are just horrible, at transitions, and to really be mindful, as in planning those transitions. A lot of parents get stuck in, I want to see them every other day. I can't go 2 days without them. Okay, let's think about that for a second. That means you're asking your child to transition 4 or 5 times a week, and they have this diagnosis, they have these difficulties with these executive functions. What are we doing here? So, really trying to help families understand, like, okay, finding a balance between, how often you see your child and how many days you go without seeing your child, but thinking really long and hard about what's in the children's best interest, given their deficits, given their challenges, and really structuring an access plan. I don't like to call it visitation, because these are parents, you're not visiting. An access plan that makes sense, for everybody, but especially for the needs of a developing child that might have some challenges in the area specific to transition and what that's going to look like. And again, it's helping parents maybe understand that if they don't see them for a few days in a row, ultimately it's what's best for the child. It'll be what's best for that relationship. And down the road, it's just going to mean for a healthier family life post-divorce.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, if the transition is with, if the use of the word transition is within the context of just trying to talk to the child, about knowing what to expect, it basically along the same lines, I would say it's just helping the child walk through as much as possible what they could expect based on the new changes. Because the word divorce, the big D word, it could mean a lot of things for a lot of different families, and a lot of younger kids, especially those who have their own mental health struggles as well.
Mm-hmm.
That could be anxiety provoking. Oh gosh, well, what's going to change now? And so if the parents, hopefully can work together to walk through what the child could expect to see, based on what Tanya was just saying, what days per week, before or after school, stuff like that. You're going to go to so-and-so on this day. You'll come in, you'll put your backpack over here. We'll have some dinner at so-and-so's new house with them. And that's what you can expect. And then at 8 o'clock, you'll go back to here. And that way, they have to worry about as little things as possible, that they can know at least that's consistent. Okay, that's structured. I can keep that in my pocket, because they're going to come in with all sorts of things from school that they'll be stressed about or worried about or what have you. But if we can work together to give as much solidity as possible, as much of a vision to the child as we can get, that will help. You're going to go to so-and-so. They live here now. They stay in this, this apartment, let's say, and it's blue and it has this, and, they're going to take this dog with them. So you get to see so-and-so. Here's who you can expect to be there. Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, no, Francis, I'm so glad you said that, because you just touched on the population that's nearest and dearest to my heart, which are my children on the autism spectrum, who probably will need a little bit more kind of forethought on this concept of transition. And what you're really describing is the concept of the social story, maybe with some visuals,
Right.
I've had parents make PowerPoints, like, here's my house, here's daddy's new house,
Videos,
and
sure.
really provide some of those, nuts and bolts visuals and social stories about what the week is going to look like, what life is going to look like. Yeah, so that was really great that you said that. I just something popped into my head, as far as helping parents just kind of get the big picture, because so many parents get stuck with, well, they're going to see that I don't spend as much time with him as mommy does. I said, well, here's what they're going to see first. They're going to first clearly see that you're pigeonholing them into a week that doesn't make sense for them. They're going to figure that out a lot sooner than how much time they're spending with you, because they're going to see this week that you've constructed for them that makes absolutely no sense based on their needs. It's all about mom and dad's needs, and they're going to feel really uncomfortable in it. And that's going to be more of a problem than how much time they're spending with each parent. I guarantee it. And once I can kind of lay things out like that for parents, they start to kind of like just, get into that, that mode of, okay, this isn't ideal for me, but it's ideal for my child, which ultimately is going to be ideal for our family and our relationship as a parent and child.
I think that, that also, if I can help parents see the difficult situation they're putting their kids in, to have the discussion about it, because I had clients in that said the kids get dropped off at grandma's in the morning, then they get on the bus and go to school, then they get off at dad's, and then they go back to mom's. I'm like, holy cow, that's 4 places in one day. And that could be every day. I don't want to do that. Like, so it's like, and the clients that say, okay, we're just going to alternate the kids every 2 days. I'm like, so there's really no consistency. It's just like, oh, whose house were we at yesterday? Or where are we going tomorrow? It's just like every 2 days. And it's like, so I just try to help parents look at the schedule as far as, like you're saying, if it's not working if it would be difficult for me, I would be like, how is this going to work for the kids?
I always also tell parents to use natural transitions whenever possible. So if your child, is involved in some kind of athletic endeavor or dance or whatever, sometimes we force transitions, which sometimes force parents in the same space together, which isn't always healthy for the child. So to utilize like natural transitions as much as possible, like getting on the bus at one house, getting off the bus at the other, and allowing life to provide those transitions, dropping off at dance and the other parent picks up. Because sometimes it's important to make sure that parents are not in the same space, with each other for some period of time. Because remember, it's not divorce that hurts, it's conflict. So whatever you can do to create a schedule that allows life to provide those transitions, I think overall will be in a child's best interest.
Yeah.
And I do have a lot of parents that just plain fake it if they have to be in the same place with the other parent, and just fake it to get through the situation.
But they shouldn't have to do that either. So if we can use like life's natural transitions to help, then
the natural transitions works. But if they're going to be at the kids' school event together, versus them saying, well, we can't be in the same place at the same time. It's like, well, again, for the best interest of the children, they want you both to be there.
Fake it till you make it.
What's the least amount of conflict that you can have if you have to be in the same place at the same time too? And I mean, I have a lot of parents that are not in the same school district, so they're trying to figure out transportation, or, I can't get an apartment in the same school district that the kids are going to be in. So, I don't know, just the logistics of the whole parenting plan to begin with. But, by helping them try to, as you're saying, put them in the least amount of conflict possible that they'd have to deal with.
And then it's helping parents kind of get, navigate when they get to the point where their kids have a social life and their friends become more important than they do, and why that's important to consider when looking at parenting plans and access and time with each parent. When they get to that point, it is important to take a look at that, because birthday parties, social events, dates, and all those kinds of things don't fall nicely into a parenting plan, and to help parents prepare for when their kids, like their friends more than they like their parents.
I always tell parents that this schedule looks great until your kid's schedule determines yours. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? I'm like, some people it'll be based around a sporting event per season, that this will work great, but for basketball season, it might be a whole different parenting plan. So, or when the kids have a job and a car, I mean, this has to transition into what's going to be in the best interest of the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at 16, when my son got his license, he came to his dad and he was like, yeah, I'm done with your parenting plan. I'm pretty much just going to do what I want. I'm like, that's fine. Mhm.
Questions?
And again,
questions?
I think it's worth saying, like, these are especially things to consider when you have kids. I mean, most kids with learning disabilities have disabilities that impact not just their ability to read, write, and do arithmetic, but to navigate life and transitions and, organizing their stuff. And so all of this becomes that much more important to, to figure out and utilize a third person if necessary, if these aren't things that you can communicate amongst yourselves about.
Well, especially, yeah, if you're on the go a lot, it's really easy for permission slips and homeworks and all that jazz to get
Yeah.
lost on the road.
Yeah.
So to have a designated landing point for all of that stuff will be really helpful, because almost like a mailbox. Okay, well, at least wherever they are, whoever house that they go to, we know that all the important stuff goes in the blue folder. Everything is the magic blue folder, and both parents know it is the backpack, and that's where it goes.
Mhm.
And that is the universal blue folder, where at least we will all be able to see the stuff that's in there. It's a good start.
Yeah.
Evoke any other thoughts from anybody on all of the things we had to say so far? Any other questions related to some of the stuff we talked about?
Well, another transition
Yeah.
besides the transition between parents' houses, and having gone through that, you're bringing back a lot of memories here. The stuff that gets left at Dad's house that you really needed on Monday, or coming home with only half your clothes, and then trying to figure out there's going to be enough socks this week. Yeah. And you're right. It's, some kids just have a really hard time organizing their stuff, and you build lists, and, it's such a learning experience for everybody. But as your child ages and you start looking down the road at, parents have dreams for their children, and they can have different dreams, and parents have different ideas about the future for their children, and how they're going to get to that future. And again, that's another area that if parents can work on with each other, so that the message that's going to the child is consistent, I would think that would help a lot, because again, the child can get really confused. Well, Mom would really like me to do this and have a job, and Dad would like me to do this, and then it becomes really important, again, focusing on the child. What does the child want? And we talk about person-centered, but sometimes that whole concept can get lost in parents' belief system and their own um, looking at the future. Because again, what happens to this child if something happens to one of the parents? And there's so many life issues that when Tanya was talking about early on about resilience, and kids learning how to be resilient, but also having the opportunity to have some of their own dreams and desires respected. That's another area that for families can be a real dilemma, given people's opinions and different belief systems, which may have contributed to the family dynamic originally. So I'm just throwing out some other thoughts there, but if any of that is stuff you've seen with people or you've helped people through, by all means, share.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's such a really, really good point too, because that does happen all the time. You know, even parents who end up staying together have different ideas of what they might want the child to do. But I think the universal, with all differences in opinion that they might have, the thing that they can agree on, I would think all parents can agree on, is that they want to be able to prepare their child for a happy and successful adulthood. And one of the essentials for a happy and successful adulthood is to first be able to say, here's what I want, to empower your child to be able to voice their goals, to visualize what goals they have, and to take the steps to make them a reality. As a child, they'll have help doing that from the parents, but the goal is during adulthood, they'll be able to hopefully make some of those choices for themselves to empower the child. And so if we can all agree that at the very least, we want to empower the child to be able to decide their own fate, to be able to think about what's important to them, to be able to set goals for themselves based on what's important to them, and to have the courage to voice what they want, even in the face of people that they really care about who may not want to hear it. That takes a lot of courage. And that's something I think most parents would agree that's an essential skill that they want their child to be able to have, is to envision what they want and to feel comfortable enough speaking aloud or communicating however that their child communicates what they want, what's important to them, what their boundaries are, in a way that they'll be heard, but also that's in line with what's important to them. Because I can't tell you how many adults I've met for Article 16 counseling, for example, who have some kind of a disability through OPWDD, of course, that's gotten the eligibility to be there. And I ask them, what do you want? What's important to you? If you envision the next chapter of your life, where is it? I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Right. As an adult. Nobody's ever asked me that before. What do you want? And so it's really, really important that we foster and encourage kids to make choices. Just to make choices. Of course, within reason, adhering to safety protocols, of course, but what do you want? What would make you happy? It's something as simple as that. Nobody really asks that.
I think that's especially important with this, if we're kind of thinking about a population of children who in some way have struggled with the, typical school format, because they probably don't feel as confident as kids who find school to be easy. So I think, that conversation that you have with children, Francis, is so much more important for our kids who are a little more vulnerable and haven't had the most success in a school environment. But I will say, generally speaking, I have this conversation with parents just as often in an intact family as I do in a divorced or conflicted family, because quite often even married parents, that stay together, have different ideas about what, they think their children should do. But I think if we can help parents focus on what's best for the child and just get them out of the marital, aspect of the conversation, I think it's easier for them to deliver a healthy message to their kid and support their child, into the next stage of life. Does that answer your question, Susan?
Yeah, it did. It did. I think you're right about, but again, that's something that, that's a dynamic that happens with all kids. It's just, it may be harder. We're more protective.
Mhm.
We're protective of our kids anyway. Some of us are, but as they get older and they become more independent, we're willing to back away and give them more freedom. But when you have a child with a disability, you tend to be even more protective.
Sure. But that's
So,
normal.
and
No, whether it's intact or separated family, I think it's important to help. And Jennifer, you probably see this as, I mean, you said you work, I think, primarily with elementary school children, but having been like in a middle school and an early high school environment too, it's using that CSE meeting every year to kind of look at what are we going to kind of remove, as far as supports from this IEP or this accommodation plan to kind of help build independence. Because I think having children with a disability, regardless of what the disability is, you're in such survival mode for some chunk of time that it's hard to take those initial steps to kind of pull some of the scaffolding away to see what legs your kids have naturally to stand on, and how important it is to kind of, as a team, kind of remove some of those supports to eventually help them transition to being more independent, kind of at the college or beyond level, whatever they decide they're going to do after high school. I think those initial, Susan, forgive me for using just kind of a colloquial term, mama bear, reactions and those protective type of things that I think kids really need when they're first getting IEPs and needing supports, because maybe there's been a delay in getting those services for them, whereas at the other end, getting the parent to kind of just back away a little bit and help, build that independence and see what they can do on their own and, tease away some of those supports little by little.
I think another dynamic just kind of is what happens with siblings. Because especially if you have one child who maybe has pretty significant needs, and yet they all have needs, but some kids' needs really stand out and they get a lot more attention because of those needs. And I know in my case, I came to really rely on my kids who were not disabled. I didn't plan to. It was almost as though they stepped into, I'll do this, Mom, I'll do that, Mom. And I'm trying to juggle 2 jobs, 3 kids, and the whole, and the household and all this other stuff. So sometimes, kids ended up taking responsibility for things. I was like, oh my gosh, I wish they hadn't had to, but they did. And, again, that built some skills and strength in them. But when my daughter, who was the middle one, who had the disabilities, when she got done with high school, her father insisted that she come live with him and then just, reverse so that she was with him more of the time and would come back and visit on weekends or whatever to me. And and he had a job for her, and and so it was really, for her, it was a really good step. What I noticed almost immediately was that her younger sister, who was a teenager then, all of a sudden started doing real teenager things. And it just really hit me. Like, she's been acting like a another adult taking care of all these things. And she hasn't had a chance to be a silly teenager like every teenager should have.
Yeah.
And you know, it was like I felt a certain amount of guilt. You know, it's like, wait a minute, was I relying on you too much or not? And because I never said you have to do that. It was almost as though she saw a need, she filled a need, and she was very good at it. And then all of a sudden, well, I don't have to do that anymore, so I can be crazy. And she had some fun. And it was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that your sister went to live with your dad for a while, so you could have that opportunity to do those things that you weren't doing or trying, if you know what I mean. And it's like, I didn't know that until it actually happened, that she was acting a whole lot more mature than she really needed to be.
Well, and I'm so glad you shared that, because I mean, obviously, we could probably do an entire other, workshop
siblings,
about being siblings of children with disabilities. And I think for the reason why, it being that, you sharing that story just kind of helps other families, other parents just step back and like maybe, take a look at the dynamic and look at it, because you get kind of bogged down in the trees, and you forget the forest. And so I think kind of doing some education for parents around, being a sibling of a child with a disability is certainly valuable as well. I've worked a lot with kids that have some pretty significant behavioral challenges, not just necessarily like learning disabilities. But I always take time to meet with the siblings in the family as well, and check in with them and allow them some time to just kind of process what it's like to have a sibling with typically it's been kids with autism, because they can definitely kind of usurp a lot of family attention. And I just say, like, there's not a roommate in college that you can't handle. Don't worry about it. But it's important to look at, to check on that dynamic too, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. We're going to be finishing up here shortly. If anybody has some thoughts or something or some questions or anything else that people would like to share, this will be a really good time to do that. Well, families are complicated. We know that. And, and we hope that love will prevail.
Yeah. And each of us is doing their best,
Yeah.
even if the child's not doing, performing as well in their academics as parents might believe that they can. The child is doing their best in some capacity throughout everything, with everything that's going on with them, with all the competing interests in their little brain. They're doing their best. We're all doing our best.
I would just say, I'm only going to speak for myself. I'm fine with, those organizing the presentation to share my email with folks that maybe registered but couldn't be here tonight.
Sure,
I understand, life happens. They might have had some burning questions. I'm totally fine with anybody emailing me any questions that they might have had, even if they watch the recording and it generates some questions. I'm fine with my email being shared.
Likewise. Yeah, please.
Same. Yep, absolutely.
Tomorrow, we'll send around the link for the survey. I've also dropped it in the chat, and it will come up on your screen once you close out tonight too. So please take a moment to complete that, because it helps us to continue to come up with good topics and things that are relevant to all of you. So we just definitely appreciate if you would complete the survey.
And thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you
It's been
very
a great.
much.
Everybody's been really very pleased to have this event, and it's been very informative, and we appreciate everyone on the panel for participating tonight and our folks for coming tonight. So thank you all, and have a good holiday.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Take care,
All right.
everyone.
Night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.